Hi there, join me this morning for an early morning photo shoot on Ramshaw Rocks. Now I'm at Ramshaw Rocks, which is just outside Leek this morning, and I'm here for an early morning photo shoot. Now I did come for a sunrise, but that's absolutely not going to happen today because, as you can tell probably from behind me, it's really misty, and so I can barely see about 30 meters in front of me. So that should provide some quite interesting conditions this morning. Also, as you can tell, I'm suffering a little bit with a sore throat, so I'm struggling to talk a little bit. So what I might end up doing if my voice gets really bad later on in the video is I might film a little bit more B-roll and do some voiceover when I get back home, but we'll see how it goes. I don't know what's going to happen today, but either way it's going to be really interesting, and I know that I'm really going to enjoy my photography. These conditions this morning are quite challenging because it's not the kind of photography that I normally do, so it's quite exciting as well. And what you've got to do is look for things that are a little bit more simple. Just behind me here is a lone tree that I've used as part of a composition, and what happens is all of this fog does simplify the image quite significantly. So you've got to think in a slightly different way. You haven't got your normal composition rules where you've got a foreground, midground and background. Everything just becomes simplified and almost a lot more abstract. So there are several things that I'm thinking about this morning when I'm composing a shot. Now the first thing is, because it's still quite dark, even though the video probably doesn't give that away, it's only just gone 6 o'clock and the sun isn't due to come up for another 5 or 10 minutes yet. Even though I'm not going to see the sun, I've not got the benefit of the sun because it'll still be down below the horizon at this point. So I'm using a longer shutter speed, which means lifting the ISO, which is not a problem because I'm on the tripod anyway, and keeping the ISO low means that I won't introduce any unnecessary noise. It just makes for a cleaner shot. The other thing that I'm thinking as well, just here in this composition, I found a boulder in the foreground and then some other rocks further back, and by doing that you get a little bit of depth again to the image. This boulder in the foreground is going to be slightly clearer, whereas the boulders and the rocks further back start to fade into the mist, and it gives a little bit more depth to the image. And also there's a little path that winds through this part of the image as well, giving us a bit of a leading line. So that's why I think this one works quite well. I found a composition here that I like. There's this main tree here on my left, which is quite striking against the mist, but then I purposely added a little tree just here that's further down the hill and therefore further into the mist, so it gives a little bit of depth. And I've made sure that the two don't overlap, but I think the two just really complement each other really well. The good thing about this morning is these lighting conditions are not really going to change a great deal now. The sun has risen, but this mist is keeping everything very flat and quite neutral, and so I'm not having to change the way I'm photographing very much because of changing light, and so it's given me lots of time to experiment. And so just behind me here is a composition I've tried, but what I've done is I've come very close to these three rocks here behind me, and this particular little white one down here I quite like, so I've included that in the composition. But I've tried very close up to the rocks with a very wide angle to get this rock here behind me in as well. But then I've moved the camera back and zoomed in a little bit, and that has really changed the perspective. Now, judging from the back of the camera, I think I do prefer the one that is slightly wider, because these rocks in the foreground become much more dominant and stronger, whereas when you go back and zoom in, it compresses the image, and I don't think it's quite as strong. These conditions really do make you think a lot more intimately. This tree just here has featured in one of my previous images, which I'll put on the screen just up here to show you how different this looks. Behind me now is really quite a grand piece of scenery. There is a set of rocks here in the background normally that are quite striking, very powerful, and when I was here for a sunrise a few years ago, I got a very nice shot of them. It was very frosty, but this morning the conditions are completely different and we can't see them. I've had a little walk down the path just to check that I am in the right place, because I wasn't even sure that this is the same tree. But those rocks there in the background are not going to feature today, because I'm having to think on a much smaller scale, but I'm still having a great time. So I've found a white rock here that I'm using as a piece of foreground interest, but I've taken these couple of shots just to show you what a difference moving a meter or two in either direction can make, and how it can improve your composition. Where the camera is now, pointing slightly to my right, it includes two rocks on the horizon, and it wasn't working for me at all. It didn't feel balanced. It felt like there was too many elements, and the gap between the two rocks behind this rock here was just too big. The whole composition didn't really work at all. So I stepped one step to here and put the camera in this position, and now I think the composition works much better, because it includes just this rock here on the horizon and this rock here in the foreground, and I think the whole composition is so much more pleasing. Just behind me here, I noticed this rock that have got some white lichen growing on it, but it's growing in stripes that make it quite interesting. So I thought this would be a very useful image to try and think of in terms of a monochrome image. So with these kind of conditions that are quite overcast anyway, there's no detail in the sky, so it's going to be very white. Picking out details like this and really pushing them in monochrome to dodge and burn the highlights and the lowlights should really bring out lots of texture here in this rock. So I'm now at the end of the ridge of rocks, and I've been walking for about 2.5 hours. Now in total it's less than a mile that I've travelled, but it's just because I've been stopping to take photographs along the way. As you can see behind me, it's still quite foggy and misty, so on the journey back to the car I'll probably see lots more things. Now I have been trying to turn around and face the direction that I've been coming from, just so I don't miss anything, but the conditions might have changed on the way back and I might see different things, and my voice seems to be holding up as well, reasonably well, so we've got plenty of time to see what else I can see today. It might not appear so, but the conditions are slightly different on the way back. The mist has cleared slightly, so I'm getting a little bit more visibility. So some of the rocks in the background are starting to just about become visible, so I can use those as some very deep interest in the image, where I can keep the foreground a lot sharper. Then I've got a ghostly outline of a rock in the background. One thing that I'm very consciously trying to achieve in my photographs this morning is some depth. If you take a photograph of an image like this from a long distance away and zoom in, it'll tend to flatten because you won't see the regression between the foreground and the background. Now this tree here in the foreground is a lot darker because it's got more shadow tones, whereas the rock here in the background is further away, so it's more in the mist and therefore it's more subdued, and that helps to give an impression of depth. I've set this composition up on purpose to give that depth in the image because I think it just makes it seem less flat and a little bit more dynamic. And this other image just here that I took is very similar because I like the tree here in the foreground very close to the camera, and then the other rocks recede into the mist as they go along the ridge line. I'm back at the location I mentioned earlier that was quite epic when I came previously, and now the mist is starting to clear a little bit. These hills and rocks here in the background are just starting to emerge, and so I've taken a shot with the tree that I used before, but I noticed this tree here a little bit closer to the rocks that I thought was a little bit more interesting. So I've used that as some foreground interest with the rocks in the background. All I'm having to do is just wait for the mist to blow through, because sometimes it's thicker than other times, and when the wind just sweeps it off, it brings out the rocks in the background a little bit more, and it makes for a more interesting background. So I'm going to stay here for a little while longer just to wait for the mist to clear to get that perfect shot, but I've got a feeling that this might be the shot of the morning.
So I'll leave you with some of my favourite photographs that I took.
I'm now back at home, and for reasons unknown to me, my microphone stopped working while I was up at Ramshaw Rocks. But I did have an amazing morning while I was there. The misty conditions just provided some really lovely photographs. I'm really pleased with what I got, and it was well worth the effort of going up there. And it just goes to show that you can still get great photographs as long as you go out. You don't have to have glorious conditions, and often the slightly more adverse conditions do give you better photographs. I do hope you've enjoyed that video, and if you have, let me know down below in the comments, and nip over to my Instagram or Facebook account, that's at Oakden Photography. Leave me your comments there, and you can also see lots of my photographs. Now, if you like what I do on the channel and want to help support me to make future content like this, then you can leave either gift shop, that's at Teespring. There I've got a range of merchandise on offer, so head off over there because a purchase really does help me out, and it's very much appreciated. But you don't have to spend any money at all to support the channel. You can do that simply by clicking like, subscribe, and the bell notifications. It really helps me out, and it makes sure that you don't miss out on any future content. Watch out for next week's video. That goes live on Sunday. In the meantime, you can go and check out this video just up here. But all that's left now is for me to go and rest my voice and say, stay safe, and I'll see you soon.